think kill jumps the gun a little. Okay, that's... I'm wondering on the tagging everyone if it actually does anything. Probably not. I'll fix that. No, that's at the top of my list. Okay. Kind of feel bad about the charity I've been trying to help because I've had that link up there for over a year and they still haven't made the amount. And sadly, my sound alerts still aren't working. Even all the troubleshooting that the system gave me, not a thing, so I don't know what's going on. Sound alerts are showing active on my main one. I don't know if any of them will actually read. Nope. I have them all turned on, so... Oh well. Hey, Papa Penguin. Ta-da! Oh, pretty good. Other than minor technical aspects being a pain in the butt. I have the auto shout, all the shout out things set to Dr. Seuss style. That's why it's doing the weird rhyming. Yeah, Frosty Tools definitely has some interesting ways you can set it up. Let's see. What other styles are there? Grizzled War Veteran. I don't think I looked at that. Oh, no. Film Noir Detective. I want to see what this one looks like. Okay, let's see. What does it say this time? Swinburne shout out only works for that one. What does it say for the other one? Uh-huh. I would need some film noir background to read these out just to make it appropriate. I like the different styles you can get on this. This one. Okay, what's this hyperactive kid? I'm kind of curious what that one's going to look like. Hey, Taka! Taka instead. Let's see what it says about Taka. Okay, yeah, that one's... I like that Shadow Eyes mode. Yeah, good so far. Playing with different settings on things. Let's see. Okay, I want to try the Grizzled War Veteran. Yay! Congrats on 500! So I gotta see what you look like. Grizzled War Veteran version. Okay, that one's kind of cool. I'll look to see what it says about me. That one's kind of cool. The War on Ignorance. Nice. But yeah, my shoutouts have gotten really fun using the Frosty tools. Let's skip over to the library. Why do I hear an ad? there's an ad playing. I don't need to hear an ad about Oreos. Yes, it is Friday. That means fairy tales, with an odd chance of me singing horribly. Probably a very good chance of me singing horribly, because fairy tales in this book have a tendency to have songs. And I think I have the shout-out features open to at least VIP. That hydrates. I guess I should do that. And since I'm not sponsored, I'm not going to say what I'm drinking. It isn't, well, I would say it's an energy drink, but it's kind of a mix of two different flavors. So, and two different companies. Oh, I jokingly said that if you donate enough money to my coffee account, I will go out and buy absinthe. So I would be drinking the Green Fairy while reading the Green Fairy. But, yeah, no takers. It was bad because I found like maybe $45 absinthe. It actually came with a spoon too, so. And that's the one that does have the wormwood in it, so yeah, it would be fun. Yeah, finances are kind of a pain for everyone at the moment. But I guess I should get into the book eventually. Well, that's 9:10. That's usually about the time I haven't raided my coin hoard yet, so. What's bad is the first story is one that I know that I've read before, but I've kind of read of a lot of stories. I mean, out of the hundreds and hundreds of fairy tales, they really do start sounding more and more alike the more you read them. And this one is a German story, and just the name of the prince is kind of repetitive, because it's Prince Fickle. But they change the elements around. But that's one of the things I like about fairy tales, is because they travel and get retranslated and brought into different lights and relocalized, and it really does change them a little. Also makes them really predictable. It's like the longer the story gets, the more and more things you recognize in it, and then you'll remember other stories that had the same thing. But that's why people like to go around and actually collect the fairy tales so they could set them down and maybe get a reasonable answer for all of them. I mean, like on my throne list, I have well, it's supposed to be a collection, but I had to find them separately. But there's a 7-volume guide to fairy tales, and it's just all the motifs that show up in them and have them categorized and everything else. It'd be really cool for research, but it's another one of those things that I don't have money for. If I didn't want to get another student loan, I'd go into actually do folklore and fairy tale research, because that is actually a thing. Or I just want to go visit the places all the stories came from. But no. I would probably vanish into the Blackwood and never be seen again. You might see a wolf. That might be me. You never know. But anyway, I guess I'll get into the stories. Hydrate one more time before I get into the story. So our first story for this wonderful, fabulous Friday night of fairy tales is Prince Fickle and the Fair Helena. There was once upon a time a beautiful girl called Helena. Her own mother had died when she was quite a child, and her stepmother was as cruel and unkind to her as she could be. Helena did all she could to gain her love, and performed the heavy work given to her cheerfully and well. But the stepmother's heart wasn't in the least touched, and the poor girl did more she asked her to do. One day she gave Helena 12 pounds of mixed feathers, and bade her to separate them all by 4 evening, threatening her with a heavy punishment if she failed to do so. The poor child sat down to her task with eyes full of tears, so full that she could hardly see to begin. And when she had made one little heap of feathers, she sighed so deeply that they all blew apart again. And so it went on, and the poor girl grew more and more miserable. She bowed her head in her hands and cried, "Is there no one under heaven who will take pity on me?" Suddenly, a soft voice replied, "Be comforted, my child. I have come to help you." Terrified to death, Helena looked up and saw a fairy standing in front of her, who asked in the kindest way possible, "Why are you crying, my dear?" Helena, who had for long had heard no friendly voice, confided her sad tale of woe to the fairy, and told her what the new task she was given to do was, and how she despaired over ever accomplishing it. "Don't worry yourself about it any more," said the kind fairy. "Lie down and go to sleep, and I'll see that your work is done all right." So Helena lay down, and when she woke, all the feathers were sorted into neat little bundles. But when she turned to thank the good fairy, she had vanished. In the evening her stepmother returned and was much amazed to find Helena sitting quietly with her work all finished before her. She praised her diligence, but at the same time racked her brain as to what harder task she could set her to do. The next day she told Helena to empty a pond near the house with a spoon which was full of holes. Helena set to work at once, but she was very soon found that what her stepmother had told her to do was an impossibility. Full of despair and misery, she was in the act of throwing the spoon away when suddenly the kind fairy stood before her again and asked her why she was so unhappy. When Helena told her of her stepmother's new demand, she said, "Trust to me, and I will do your task for you. Lie down and have a sleep in the meantime." Helena was comforted and lay down, and before you would have even believed it possible, the fairy roused her gently and told her the pond was empty. Full of joy and gratitude, Helena hurried to her stepmother, hoping that now, at last, her heart should be softened toward her. But the wicked woman was furious at the frustration of her own evil designs, and only thought of what harder thing she could set the girl to do. Next morning she ordered her to build, before evening, a beautiful castle, and furnish it all from the garnets to the basement. Helena sat down on the rocks, which had been pointed out to her as the site of the castle, feeling very depressed, but at the same time with a lurking hope that the kind fairy would once more come to her aid. And, as it turned out, the fairy appeared, promised to build the castle, and told Helena to lie down and to go to sleep in the meantime. At the word of the fairy, the rocks and stones rose and built themselves into a beautiful castle, and before sunset it was all furnished inside, and nothing left inside to be desired. You may think how grateful Helena was when she woke and found her task all finished. But her stepmother was anything but pleased, and went through the whole castle from top to bottom to see if she couldn't find some fault for which she could punish Helena. At last she went down into one of the cellars, but it was so dark that she fell down the steep stairs and was killed on the spot. So Helena was now mistress of the beautiful castle, and lived there in peace and happiness. And soon the noise of her beauty spread abroad, and many wooers came to try and gain her hand. Among them came one Prince Fickle by name, who very quickly won the love of fair Helena. One day, as they were sitting happily under a lime tree in front of the castle, Prince Fickle broke the sad news to Helena that he must return to his parents to get their consent for the marriage. He promised faithfully to come back to her as soon as he could, and begged her to await him under the lime tree where they had spent so many happy hours. Helena kissed him tenderly in parting on his left cheek, and begged him not to let anyone else kiss him there while they were parted. And she promised to sit and to wait for him under the lime tree, for she never doubted that the prince would be faithful to her and would return as quickly as he could. And so she sat for 3 days and 3 nights under the tree without moving. But when her lover never returned, she grew very unhappy, and determined to set out to look for him. She took as many of her jewels with her as she could, with great difficulty that Helena escaped from him when the crowd was in time to come home. Ooh, I skipped a few pages. Yeah. She took as many of her jewels as she could, and 3 of her most beautiful dresses, one embroidered with stars, one with moons, and the third with suns, all of pure gold. Far and wide she wandered through the world, but nowhere did she find any trace of her bridegroom. At last she gave up the search in despair. She could not bear to return to her own castle, where she had been so happy with her lover, but determined rather to endure her loneliness and desolation in a strange land. She took a place as a herd girl with a peasant, and buried her jewels and beautiful dresses in a safe and well-hidden spot. Every day she drove the cattle to pasture, and all the time she thought of nothing but her faithless bridegroom. She was very devoted to a certain little calf in the herd, and made a great pet of it, feeding it out of her own hands. She taught it to kneel before her, and then she whispered in its ear, "Kneel, little calf, kneel, be faithful and leal, not like Prince Fickle, who once on a time left his fair Helena under the lime." After some years passed in this way, she heard that the daughter of the king of the country she was living in was going to marry a prince called Fickle. Everyone rejoiced at the news, except poor Helena, to whom it was a fearful blow, for at the bottom of her heart she had always believed her lover to be true. Now, it chanced that the way to the capital led right past the village where Helena was, and often when she was leading her cattle forth the meadows, Prince Fickle rode past her, without ever noticing the poor herd girl, so engrossed was he in thoughts of his new bride. Then it occurred to Helena to put his heart to the test, and to see if it weren't possible to recall himself to her. So one day as Prince Fickle rode by, she said to her little calf, "Kneel, little calf, kneel, be faithful and leal, not like Prince Fickle, who once on a time left his poor Helena under the lime." When Prince Fickle heard her voice, it seemed to him to remind him of something, but of what he couldn't remember, for he hadn't heard the words distinctly, as Helena had only spoken them very low and with a shaky voice. Helena herself had been far too moved to let her see what impression her words had made on the prince, and when she looked around, he was already far away. But she noticed how slowly he was riding, and how deeply sunk he was in thought, so she didn't give herself up quite as lost. In honor of the approaching wedding, a feast lasting many nights was given at the capital. Helena placed all her hopes on this, and determined to go to the feast, and there to seek her bridegroom. When evening drew near, she stole out of the peasant's cottage secretly, and going to her hiding place, she put on her dress embroidered with the golden suns, and all her jewels, and loosened her beautiful golden hair, which up till now she had always worn under her handkerchief, and thus adorned, she set out for the town. When she entered the ballroom, all eyes were turned on her, and everyone marveled at her beauty, but no one knew who she was. Prince Fickle, too, was quite dazzled by the charms of the beautiful maiden, and never guessed that she was once his own lady love. He never left her side all night, and it was with great difficulty that Helena escaped from him in the crowd when it was time to return home. Prince Fickle searched for her everywhere, and longed eagerly for the next night, when the beautiful lady had promised to come again. The following evening, the fair Helena started early for the feast. This time she wore her dress embroidered with silver moons, and her hair was placed in a silver crescent. Prince Fickle was enchanted to see her again, and she seemed to him more beautiful than she had been the night before. He again never left her side and refused to dance with anyone else. He begged her to tell him who she was, but this she refused to do. Then he implored her to return again next evening, and this she promised him she would. On the third evening, Prince Fickle was so impatient to see his fair enchantress again that he arrived at the feast hours before it began, and never took his eyes from the door. At last Helena arrived in a dress all covered with gold and silver stars, with a girdle of stars around her waist and a band of stars in her hair. Prince Fickle was more in love with her than ever, and begged her once again to tell him her name. And then Helena kissed him silently on the left cheek, and in a moment Prince Fickle recognized his old love. Full of remorse and sorrow, he begged her for her forgiveness, and Helena, only too pleased to have got him back again, did not, you may sure, keep him waiting very long for her pardon. And so they were married and returned to Helena's castle, where they are, no doubt, still sitting happily together under the lime tree. Hey, Matsu! Thank you for the hydrates. I don't have to sing twice in that one. At least they were short ones. And I've been told by the people who do the video shoutouts, they find it hilarious that I sing during the streams. No, lately the only ones that have been coming up have been my July 4th ones from last year. And, you know, everyone doesn't need to hear me saying the oath of office. Because I'm not running for president. I'm not sure how the world would handle a VTuber president, much less a wolf. Public addresses would be interesting. And it's strange enough to listen to the AI conversations between presidents, and current presidents, and previous presidents, but that's just AI speaking. That's just craziness. As for me saying the oath of office, I never want to hold a political position. I am strongly not politics. Okay, I'm kind of curious what it'll say on Metsu. Let me see. I've been playing with my shit. Oh, all that typing and it didn't go in. Okay. Let's see, what will it say? I think I still have it on Grizzled War Veteran. Oh, come on, it's not coming up. Dang it. That's no fair. Let's switch it to Shakespearean actor. Okay. Try this again. Oh, there we go. Much better. Hark! As Matsu Quinox's study tales unfold, as Sir Gawain's quest is bravely told, with a voice so soft like whispers in the night, they read with care, each word with a pure delight. ASMR's charm doth grace their stream, a sanctuary where all can dream. Alas, no recent podcasts of you are here, but in their library there's naught to fear. Okay, I like the Shakespearean one. I've got a bot that's called Frosty Tools that writes all those out. It's really cool. That's what the Dr. Seuss would say. Okay. Do this again. What does the Dr. Seuss version say? Will it come up? There we go. In the study, a cozy nook, Matsu Quinox reads a book. With whispers soft and tales so grand, they'll take you to a far-off land. ASMR magic in the air, like a nightly quest beyond compare. No recent broadcast to be seen, but oh, the places you'll go in Matsu's screen beams. So gather round, both near and far, for interdimensional stories are what you are. Okay, I like that one too. Honestly, it's a great app to use. I've been having way too much fun with it. Shakespearean actor. That's a cool one. Okay. I'm gonna hydrate one more time. I'll try to catch this one up. Okay. Okay. What is with German fairy tales and calling daughters after vegetables or herbs? Oh. Anyway, again, this next one is German. So our second tale for the evening, Puddocky. There was once upon a time a poor woman who had one little daughter called Parsley. She was so called because she liked eating parsley better than any other food. Indeed, she would hardly eat anything else. Her poor mother hadn't enough money always to keep buying parsley for her, but the child was so beautiful that she could refuse her nothing. And so she went every night to the garden of an old witch who lived near and stole great branches of the coveted vegetable in order to satisfy her daughter. This remarkable taste of the fair parsley became known, and the theft was discovered. The witch called the girl's mother to her and proposed that she should let her have her daughter come and live with her, and then she could eat as much parsley as she liked. The mother was quite pleased with this suggestion, and so the beautiful parsley took up her abode with the old witch. One day, 3 princes, whom their father had sent abroad to travel, came to the town where Parsley lived, and perceived the beautiful girl combing and plaiting her long black hair at the window. In one moment they all fell hopelessly in love with her, and longed adherently to have the girl for their wife. But hardly had they with one breath expressed their desire, then mad with jealousy they drew their swords, and all 3 set upon each other. Princes. The struggle was so violent that the noise so loud that the old witch heard it, and said at once,
"Of course Parsley is at the bottom of all this."
And when she had convinced herself that this was so, she stepped forward, and, full of wrath over quarrels and feuds Parsley's beauty gave rise to, she cursed the girl.
"I wish you were an ugly toad sitting under a bridge at the other end of the world."
Hardly were these words out of her mouth than Parsley was changed into a toad, and vanished from their sight. The princes, now that the cause of their dispute was removed, put up their swords, kissed each other affectionately, and returned to their father. The king, he was growing old and feeble, and wished to yield his scepter and crown in favor of one of his sons, but he couldn't make up his mind which of the 3 he should appoint as his successor. He determined that fate should decide for him, so he called his 3 children to him and said, "My dear sons, I am growing old and am weary of reigning, but I can't make up my mind to which of you 3 I should yield my crown, for I love you all equally. At the same time, I would like the best and cleverest of you to rule over my people. I have, therefore, determined to set you 3 tasks to do, and the one that performs them best shall be my heir. The first thing I shall ask you to do is to bring me a piece of linen 100 yards long, and so fine that it will go through a gold ring." The sons bowed low and promised to do their best. They started on their journey without further delay. The 2 elder brothers took many servants and carriages with them, but the youngest set out quite alone. In a short time they found the 3 crossroads. 2 of them were gay and crowded, but the 3rd was dark and lonely. The 2 elder brothers chose the more frequented ways, and the youngest, bidding them a fond farewell, set out on the dreary road. Wherever linen was to be bought, there the 2 elder brothers hastened. They loaded their carriages with bales of the finest linen they could find, and then returned home. The youngest brother, on the other hand, went on his weary way for many days, and nowhere did he come across any linen that would have done. So he journeyed on, and his spirits sank with every step. At last he came to a bridge which stretched over a deep river flowing through flat and marshy land. Before crossing the bridge he sat down on the banks of the stream and sighed dismally over his sad fate. Suddenly, a misshapen toad crawled out of the swamp, and sitting down opposite him, said,
"What's the matter with you, dear prince?"
The prince answered impatiently, "There's not much good in my telling you, Puddocky, for you couldn't help me if I did."
Don't be so sure of that, replied the toad. Tell me your trouble, and we'll see.
Then the prince became most confidential and told the little creature why he had been sent out of his father's kingdom.
Prince, I will certainly help you, and, said the toad, crawling back into her swamp.
She returned, dragging after her a piece of linen, not bigger than a finger, which she laid before the prince, saying,
Take this robe, and you'll see it will help you.
The prince had no wish to take such an insignificant bundle with him, but he didn't like to hurt Puddockie's feelings by refusing it, so he took up the little packet and put it in his pocket, and bade the little toad farewell. Puddocky watched the prince till he was out of sight, and then crept back into the water. The further the prince went, the more he noticed that the pocket in which the little roll of linen lay became heavier, and in proportion his heart grew lighter, and so, greatly comforted, he turned to the court of his father, and arrived home just at the same time his brothers did with their caravans. The king was delighted to see them all again, and at once drew the ring from his finger, and the trial began. And all the wagon loads, there was not a piece of linen, the 10th part of which would go through the ring. And the two elder brothers, who had at first sneered at their youngest brother for returning with no baggage, began to feel rather small. But what were their feelings when he drew the bale of linen out of his pocket? With such fineness, softness, purity of color was unsurpassable. The threads were hardly visible, and it went through the ring without the smallest of difficulties, at the same time measuring 100 yards quite correctly. The father embraced his fortunate son and commanded the rest of the linen to be thrown into the water. Then turning to his children, he said,
Now, my dear princes, prepare yourselves for a second task. You must bring me back a little dog that will go comfortably into a walnut shell.
The sons were all in despair over this demand, but they each wished to win the crown. They determined to do their best, and after a very few days set out on their travels again. At the crossroads they separated once more, and the youngest went by himself along his lonely way, but this time he felt much more cheerful. Hardly had he sat down under the bridge and heaved a sigh, than Puddocky came out, and sitting down opposite him asked,
What's wrong with you now, dear prince?
The prince, who this time never doubted the little toad's power to help him, told her his difficulty at once.
Prince, I will help you,
said the toad again, and crawled back into her swamp as fast as her short little legs could carry her. She returned, dragging a hazelnut behind her, which she laid at the prince's feet, and said,
Take this nut home with you, and tell your father to crack it very carefully, and you'll see what will happen.
The prince thanked her heartily, and went on his way in the best of spirits, while the little Puddock crept slowly back into the water. When the prince got home, he found his brothers had just arrived with great wagon loads of little dogs of all sorts. The king had a walnut shell ready, and the trial begun. But not one of the dogs of the two eldest sons had brought them would fit at least into the shell. When they had tried their little dogs, the youngest son handed his father the hazelnut, with a modest bow, and begged him to crack it carefully. Hardly had the old king done so, than a lovely tiny dog sprang out of the nutshell, and ran about on the king's hand, wagging its tail and barking lustily at all the other dogs. The joy of the court was great. The father again embraced his fortunate son, commanding the rest of the small dogs to be thrown into the water and drowned, and once more addressed the sons.
The two most difficult tasks have been performed. Now listen to the third and last. Whoever brings the fairest wife home with him shall be my heir."
This demand seemed easy and somewhat agreeable, and the reward was so great that the princes lost no time in setting forth on their travels. At the crossroads, the two eldest brothers debated if they should go the same way as the youngest, but when they saw how dreary and deserted it looked, they made up their minds that it would be impossible to find what they sought in the wilds. And so they stuck to their former paths. The youngest was very depressed at this time, and said to himself, "Anything else Puddocky could have helped me in, but this is quite a task beyond her power. How could she ever find a beautiful wife for me? Her swamps are wide and empty, and no human beings dwell there, only frogs and toads and other creatures of that sort." However, he sat down under the bridge as usual, and this time he sighed from the bottom of his heart. In a few moments the toad stood in front of him and asked,
"What's the matter with you now, my dear prince?"
In a few minutes the toad stood in front of him. "Oh, Puddocky, this time you can't help me, for the task is beyond even your power," replied the prince.
"Still," answered the toad, "you may as well tell me your difficulty, for who knows, I mayn't be able to help you this time also."
The prince then told her the task they had been set to do.
"I'll help you right enough, my dear prince," said the toad. "Just you go home, and I'll soon follow you."
With these words, Puddocky, with a quiet spring unlike her usual slow movements, jumped into the water and disappeared. The prince rose up and went sadly on his way, for he didn't believe it was possible that the little toad could really help him in his present difficulty. He had hardly gone a few steps when he heard the sound behind him, and, looking round, he saw a carriage made of cardboard, drawn by 6 big rats, coming towards him. 2 hedgehogs rode in front as outriders, and on the box sat a fat mouse as coachman, and behind stood 2 little frogs as footmen. In the carriage itself sat Puddocky, who kissed her hand to the prince out of the window as she passed by. Sunk deep in thought of the fickleness of fortune that had granted him 2 of his wishes, and now seemed about to deny him the last and best, the prince hardly noticed the absurd equipage, and still less he felt inclined to laugh at its comedic appearance. The carriage drove on in front of him for some time, then turned a corner. But what was his joy and surprise when suddenly, round that same corner, but coming towards him, there appeared a beautiful coach drawn by 6 splendid horses, with outriders, coachmen, footmen, and other servants, all in the most gorgeous liveries, and seated in the carriage was the most beautiful woman the prince had ever seen, and in whom he at once recognized the beautiful Parsley, for whom his heart had formerly burned. The carriage stopped when it was reached him, and the footman sprang down and opened the door for him. He got in and sat down beside the beautiful Parsley, and thanked her heartily for her help, and told her how much he loved her. And so he arrived at his father's capital at the same time as his brothers, who had returned with many carriage loads of beautiful women. But when they were all led before the king, the whole court, with one consent, awarded the prize of beauty to the fair Parsley. The old king was delighted, and embraced his thrice fortunate son and his new daughter-in-law tenderly, and appointed them successors to the throne. But he commanded the other women to be thrown into the water and drowned, like the bales of linen and little dogs. The prince married Parsley, and reigned long and happily with her, and if they aren't dead, I suppose they are still living. Oh, the homicide. What the heck? I mean, the linen, maybe. Throwing all the dogs in the river? No. Throwing all the women? What the hell? That's just crazy. And we're in ads, so... Nope, we're not in ads yet. Okay. But that's another one of the stories that has the same motifs as the White Cat. And a few others. I said, we really need to get our hands on those research books. Because the White Cat had the same one. And that was the French version. This was a German version. What's this frog? Well, toad. Should have been a frog because it was living in a swamp, and toads don't typically live around water. Can't remember which other stories I've read that had the same motifs. But hey, that's fairy tales. But the ads are about to start, so. Do 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 do. Yes, the ads are going. It told me the ads were supposed to be going. Are the ads going? No, now the ads are going. What's that? Oh, that one's cool. A news update from Kentron Valgyrie's chat room. Kentron Valgyrie snagged a wine-hop on the wild Pokemon hunt, while Sneaky Swirlix gave everyone the slip. Kel Monreal was begging for clips and pushing TTS buttons. Usual chaos ensues. But they're also plugging bookish affiliate stores and rallying for donations for Wild West wildlife. Matsu Quinox is in for all the Green Fairy Book saga. Stay tuned for more magical tales and continued shenanigans. I wonder if that's one of the things I set up on it too. Did I switch that to... I don't have access to that one yet. Where is this setup? Wait, is that the... Right. Attention retention. Okay, that's what that one is. Chat recaps. Okay, I want to do that as movie trailer. Oh, I can tell what kind. That's cool. No, it's on a randomizer too. Cool. Okay. Community shenanigans. I don't know if the ads are over. Can I fix that? No. I don't know. Are the ads over? Anyone? Oh well, let's get on with the next story. No, wait. Ooh, I'm gonna have to definitely enter that one. Okay. Hopefully the ads are over. Oh, my watering streamer paused. Okay. Our next story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. What? Okay. Do I have ads going or someone else's? Okay, someone else's. I heard ads going, but I'm lurking in on the stream. Okay. Anyway, our next fabulous story for this Friday night of fairy tales. The story of Hawk Lee and the Dwarves. There once lived in a small town in China a man named Hawk Lee. He was a steady, industrious man who not only worked hard for his trade, but did all his housework as well, for he had no wife to do it for him. "What an excellent, industrious man is this Hawk Lee," said his neighbors. "How hard he works. He never leaves his house to amuse himself or to take a holiday as others do." But Hawk Lee was by no means the virtuous person his neighbors thought him. True, he worked hard by day, but at night, when all respectable folk were fast asleep, he used to steal out and join a dangerous band of robbers who broke into rich people's houses and carried off all they could lay hands on. This state of things went on for some time, and though a thief was caught now and then and punished, no suspicion ever fell on Hawk Lee. He was such a very respectable, hard-working man. Hawk Lee had already amassed a good store of money as his share of the proceeds of these robberies, when it happened one morning on going to market that a neighbor said to him, "Why, Hawk Lee, what is the matter with your face? One side of it is all swelled up." True enough, Hawk Lee's right cheek was twice the size of his left, and it soon began to feel very uncomfortable. "I will bind up my face," said Hawk Lee. "Doubtless the warmth will cure up the swelling." But no such thing. Next day it was worse, and day by day it grew bigger and bigger, till it was nearly as large as his head, and became quite painful. Hawk Lee was at his wit's end on what to do. Not only was his cheek unsightly and painful, but his neighbors began to cheer and make fun of him, which hurt his feelings very much indeed. One day, as luck would have it, a traveling doctor came to town. He sold not only all kinds of medicines, but also dealt with many strange charms against witches and evil spirits. Hockley determined to consult him, and asked him into his house. After the doctor had examined him carefully, he spoke thus. "This, Hockley, is no ordinary swelled face. I strongly suspect you have been doing some wrong deed which has called down the anger of the spirits on you. None of my drugs will avail to cure you, but if you are willing to pay me handsomely, I can tell you how you may be cured." Then Hockley and the doctor began to bargain together, and it was a long time before they could come to terms. However, the doctor got the better of it at the end, for he was determined not to part with the secret under a certain price. And Hockley had no mind to carry his huge cheek about with him to the end of his days. So he was obliged to part with the greater portion of his ill-gotten gains. When the doctor had pocketed the money, he told Hockley to go up the first night of the full moon to a certain wood, and there to watch by a particular tree. After a time, he would see the dwarfs and little sprites who live underground come out to dance. When they saw him, they would be sure to make him dance too. "And mind you dance your very best," added the doctor. "If you dance well and please them, they will grant you a petition, and you can then beg to be cured. But if you dance badly, they will most likely do something mischievous out of spite." Well, with that, he took leave and departed. Happily, the first night of the full moon was near, and at the proper time Hockley set out for the wood. With a little trouble, he found the tree the doctor had described, and, feeling nervous, he climbed up into the tree. He had hardly settled himself on a branch when he saw the little dwarfs assembling in the moonlight. They came from all sides, till at length there appeared to be hundreds of them. They seemed in high glee, and danced, skipped, and capered about, whilst Hockley grew so eager watching them that he crept further and further along his branch, till at length it gave a loud crack. All the dwarves stood still, and Hockley felt as if his heart stood still also. Then one of the dwarfs called out, "Someone is up in that tree! Come down at once, whoever you are, or we must come and fetch you!" In great horror, Hockley proceeded to come down, and he was so nervous that he tripped near the ground and came rolling in most absurd manner. When he had picked himself up, he came forward with a low bow, and the dwarf who had first spoken, and who appeared to be the leader, said, "Now then, who art you, and what brings thee here?" So Hockley told him the sad story of his swelled cheek, and how he had been advised to come to the forest and beg the dwarves to cure him. "It is well," replied the dwarf. "We will see about that. First, however, thou must dance before us. Should thy dancing please us, perhaps we may be able to do a little something. But should thou dance badly, we shall assuredly punish thee. So now take warning and dance away." With that, he and all the other dwarves sat in a large ring, leaving Hockley to dance alone in the middle. He felt half frightened to death, and besides was a good deal shaken by his fall from the tree, and did not feel at all inclined to dance. But the dwarfs were not to be trifled with. "Begin!" cried their leader, and "Begin!" shouted the rest in chorus. So in despair, Hockley began. First he hopped on one foot, and then on another, but he was so stiff and so nervous that he made but a poor attempt, and after a time sank down on the ground and vowed he could dance no more. The dwarfs were very angry. They crowded around Hockley and abused him.
"Thou to come here to be cursed indeed," they cried. "Thou hast brought one big cheek with thee, but thou shalt take away two."
And with that, they ran off and disappeared, leaving Hockley to find his way home as best he might. He hobbled away, weary and depressed, and not a little anxious on one account of the dwarf's threat. Nor were his fears unfounded, for when he rose next morning, he found his left cheek was swelled up as big as his right, and he could hardly see out of his eyes. Hockley felt in despair, and his neighbors jeered at him more than ever. The doctor, too, had disappeared, so there was nothing for it to try the dwarfs once more. He waited a month until the first night of the full moon to come around again, and then he trudged back to the forest and sat down under the tree from which he had fallen. He had not long to wait, ere the dwarves came trooping out, as though they were all assembling.
"I don't feel quite easy," said one. "I feel as if some horrid human were near us."
When Hockley heard this, he came forward and bent low to the ground before the dwarves, who came crowding again and laughed heartily at his comical appearance with his two big cheeks.
"What dost thou want?"
they asked, and Hockley proceeded to tell them of his fresh misfortunes, and begged so hard to be allowed one more trial at dancing that the dwarves consented, for there's nothing they love so much as being amused. Now, Hockley knew how much depended on his dancing well, so he plucked up a good spirit and began, first quite slowly and faster by degrees, and he danced so well and gracefully and made such new and wonderful steps that the dwarves were quite delighted with him. They clapped their tiny hands and shouted,
"Well done, Hockley, well done! Go on, dance more, for we are pleased."
And Hockley danced on, till he really could dance no more, and was obliged to stop. Then the leader of the dwarves said,
"We are well pleased, Hockley, and as a recompense for thy dancing, thy face shall be cured. Farewell!"
And with these words, he and the other dwarves vanished, and Hockley, putting his hands to his face, found to his great joy that his cheeks were reduced to their natural size. The way home seemed short and easy to him, and he went to bed happy, and resolved never to go out robbing again. Next day the whole town was full of news of Hock's sudden cure. His neighbors all questioned him, but could get nothing from him except the fact that he had discovered a wonderful cure for all kinds of diseases. After a time, a rich neighbor who had been ill for some years came and offered to give Hockley a large sum of money if he could tell him how he might be cured. Hockley consented on condition that he swore to keep the secret. He did so, and Hockley told him of the dwarfs and their dances. The neighbor went off, carefully obeyed Hockley's directions, and was duly cured by the wolves. Then another and another came to Hockley to beg his secret, and from each he extracted a vow of secrecy and a large sum of money. This went on for some years, so that at length Hockley became a very wealthy man, and ended his days in peace and prosperity. That's another one that kind of goes with another story. The one that they go to the woods to because they had a hump. Oh, dang, I missed that Pokemon. I'm really getting into stories I read before. Anyway, our next wonderful story for this Friday night of fairy tales, which I will definitely have to post to a friend because my friend is a bear. And this story is The Three Bears. Once upon a time, there were three bears who lived together in a house of their own in a wood. One of them was little, small, just a wee bear. One was a middle-sized bear, and the other was a great, huge bear. They had each a pot for their porridge, a little one for the small, wee bear, a middle-sized one for the middle bear, and a great pot for the great, huge bear. And they each had a chair to sit in, a little chair for the little, small, wee bear, a middle-sized chair for the middle bear, and a great chair for the great, huge bear. And they each had a bed to sleep in, a little bed for the little, small, wee bear, a middle-sized bed for the middle bear, and a great bed for the great, huge bear. One day, after they had made the porridge for their breakfast and poured it into their porridge pots, they walked out into the wood while the porridge was cooling, that they might not burn their mouths by beginning to eat it so soon. While they were walking, a little old woman came to the house. She could not have been a good, honest old woman, for first, she looked in at the window, and then she peeped in at the keyhole, and, seeing nobody in the house, she lifted the latch. The door was not fastened, because the bears were good bears who did nobody any harm, and never suspected that anyone would do them harm. So the little old woman opened the door and went in, and well pleased she was when she saw the porridge on the table. If she had been a good little old woman, she would have waited till the bears came home, and then, perhaps, she would have asked for her breakfast. For they were good bears. A little rough, but the manners of bears is. But for all, the very good-natured and hospitable. But she was an impudent, bad old woman, and set about helping herself. So she tasted the first porridge of the great huge bear, and that was still too hot for her, and she said a bad word about that. And then she tasted the porridge of the middle bear, and that was too cold for her, and she said a bad word about that too. Then she went to the porridge of the little, small, wee bear and tasted that, and that was neither too hot nor too cold, but just right, and she liked it so well that she ate it all up. But the naughty old woman said a bad word about the little porridge pot because it did not hold enough for her. Then the little old woman sat down in the chair of the great huge bear, and that was too hard for her. And then she sat down in the chair of the middle bear, and that was too soft for her. And then she sat down in the chair of the little small wee bear, and that was neither too hard nor too soft, but just right. So she seated herself in it, and there she sat until her bottom of the chair came out. And down came she, plump upon the ground. That naughty old woman said a wicked word about that too. Then the little old woman went upstairs to the bedchamber in which the three bears slept. At first she lay down in the bed of the great huge bear, but that was too high at the head for her. And then she lay down upon the bed of the middle bear, and that was too high at the foot for her. And then she lay down in the bed of the little small wee bear, and that was neither too high at the head nor too high at the foot, but just right. So she covered herself up comfortably and lay there till she fell fast asleep. By this time the three bears thought their porridge would be cool enough, and so they came home for breakfast. Now the little old woman had left a spoon in the great huge bear standing in his porridge.
"Someone has been eating my porridge,"
said the great huge bear in his great gruff voice. And when the middle bear looked at his porridge, he saw that the spoon was standing in it too. Then the wooden spoons, if they had been silver ones, the naughty old woman would have put them in her pocket.
"Someone has been at my porridge,"
said the middle bear in his middle voice. And then the little small wee bear looked at his, and there was a spoon in his porridge pot, but the porridge was all gone.
"Someone has been in my porridge and has eaten it all up,"
said the small little wee bear with his little small wee voice. Upon this, the three bears, seeing that someone had entered their house and had eaten up the little small wee bear's breakfast, began to look about them. Now the old woman had not been put on the hard cushion straight when she rose from the great bear's chair. "Someone has been sitting in my chair," said the great huge bear in his great rough, gruff voice. And the little old woman had squatted down in the soft cushion of the middle bear.
"Someone has been sitting in my chair,"
said the middle bear in his middle voice. And you know what the little old woman had done to the third chair.
"Someone's been sitting in my chair and has sat the bottom of it out,"
said the little small wee bear in his little small wee voice. Then the three bears thought it necessary that they should make farther their search, so they went up to their bedchamber. Now the little old woman had pulled the pillow of the great huge bear out of its place. "Someone has been lying in my bed," said the great huge bear in his great rough, gruff voice. And the little old woman had pulled the bolster of the middle bear's bed out of place.
"Someone has been sitting in my bed,"
said the middle bear in his middle voice. And when the small little wee bear came to look at his bed, there was a bolster in its place, and the pillow in its place upon the bolster, and upon the pillow was the little old woman's ugly, dirty head, which was not in its place, for she had no business to be there.
"Someone has been lying in my bed, and here she is,"
said the little small wee bear in his little small wee voice. The little old woman heard in her sleep the great gruff, rough voice of the great huge bear, but she was so fast asleep that it made no more to her than the roaring of wind or the rumble of thunder.
When she had heard the middle voice of the middle bear, it was only as if she had heard someone speaking in a dream.
But when she heard the little small wee voice of the little small wee bear, it was so sharp and so shrill that it had wakened her at once. Up she started. When she saw the three bears on one side of the bed, she tumbled herself out of the other and ran to the window. Now the window was open, because the bears, like good tidy bears as they were, always opened their bedchamber window when they got up in the morning. Out the little old woman jumped, and whether she broke her neck in the fall or ran in the woods was lost there, or found her way out of the wood and was taken for a constable to the house of correction for the vagrant that she was, I cannot tell. But the three bears never saw anything more of her. Little old woman, not Goldilocks. And not a couple with a kid, just three sizes of bears. I guess I can understand why later translations have made them a family instead of just, three guys living together. Excuse me. That was me swallowing. That's just a weird sound. Better than the meowing I had in my second story yesterday. Let's see. I know for just the title I've read this other one before. Well, that is one of the things about fairy tales. I've read several of them several times. I'm just putting them in different playlists afterwards. I thought I've read this Prince Vivian and the Princess Placida just in the Pink Fairy book. I thought, not that long ago. I would have to look at my records for that. Hmm. 1023. Princess Placida, that's 28 pages. This would be a really long one. What say you lurkers in chat? Should I read another one? We've done, yeah, done already. We've done 4 stories so far. Or have all my lurkers fallen asleep listening to fairy tales? Which I guess is kind of my purpose, because, you know, it's fairy tales. I expect people to kind of doze off. Because I do this for, you know, comfort streaming. Okay, the next one is a longer story. That would definitely carry me over past 11 p.m. I know I read this one not that long ago. Check my archives real quick. When did I read this last? I've got 453 things in my Twitch archive right now. Just search it. No, I can't search it. Let's go see some personates. That's read fairy books of the previous one. Looking for La Placida. Okay, that was when I was reading out of Beauty and the Beasts. Let's see, where did I read this one? Narcissus and Pontanea, Celandine. Okay. It's been almost a year since I read the story. Dang. And when I read it last time, it was over an hour. So I'm going to go ahead and wait until next week to continue. That way it'll at least be April when I get to it again. So what's funny is I'm going to post a link to the previous version. Sorry, the next story in this book is one that I literally read almost a year ago. Which means a lot of the ones I've been reading lately I've probably read previously. No. So we're going to go ahead and switch screens. Again, thank you everyone for coming in tonight. And let's find a raid target. Actually, I already told Dusk I was playing a raider, so I'll raid Dusk. So, those of you who don't know Dusk, I'm going to shout it out real quick. She is doing art right now. Oh, come on. Just did the same shout out twice? That's not fair. I want to see the cool one. Really? Aren't you working, Frosty? Oh well. Anyway, Frosty's always doesn't want to work. So, again, thank you all for coming. I'm glad you came by, listened to a couple of stories. And, well, I haven't even posted the raid messages yet. Raid for followers. Raid for subscribers. Oop, wrong one. Raid Duskwalker. There we go. There. Why do you keep doing that? There we go. And that, what do you, oh. Helps if I can spell. There we go. But again, thank you everyone for coming in, and I will hopefully see you next week. Please check my Twitter, vote on which topic we should list ourselves as. And I will see you next Thursday for the last of my Sherlock Holmes stories, his last bow. I'll see you over in Dusks.